They told him the restroom was down the hall. He didn't argue. He just smiled, knowing he owned the chandelier hanging above their heads. Welcome to Unveiled Wealth, where every story unmasks what power tries to hide. The Bellwether Grand wasn't just a hotel. It was an empire disguised as architecture. From the outside, it rose like a monument to excess white marble veins kissed by the golden glow of imported Italian sconces. Valet lines weaving through Bentleys and vintage Aston Martins, like a living tribute to money itself. Inside, the air smelled like a $3,000 bottle of oud-infused luxury perfume, with a note of old money arrogance lingering underneath. The floors were polished so perfectly you could check your stocks in the reflection. The chandeliers weren't just glass, they were hand-blown in Murano, each piece insured for more than most people's mortgages. Marcus Reed stood under one of those chandeliers, now hoodie-faded, sneakers scuffed, backpack slung low, and watched himself disappear in their eyes. Not metaphorically. Literally, the front desk didn't even blink when he walked in. A slim woman with hair pulled into a severe bun and a name tag that glittered more than her smile gave him a glance so fleeting it felt like a swipe left on a dating app. "Restrooms down the hall," she said without inflection, eyes darting back to the gleaming iMac in front of her. Not a question, not a suggestion. An order, Picherie. Marcus let the words settle like dust on polished brass. He didn't protest. He didn't flash credentials. He didn't announce who he was, because real power doesn't need permission to be present. It just is. He turned, hands deep in the pockets of his worn hoodie, and strolled across the lobby. The hush of conversation, the clink of glasses at the nearby lobby bar, the low hum of wealth moving effortlessly all continued without him. The carpet beneath his feet was a custom Persian weave, probably chosen by a designer who had never set foot in a car priced under 6 figures. It muted his footsteps so completely that Marcus felt like a ghost, one the staff preferred not to see. He approached the check-in counter again, this time deliberately making eye contact. The second clerk, male, early 30s, sharp suit, sharper eyes, gave a tight, practiced smile. But it didn't reach his pupils. The kind of smile you offer a stranger you'd rather not talk to at all. "Can I help you?" the man said, with just enough bite under the silk. Marcus offered the reservation code calmly. Checking in. Marcus Reed. The clerk tapped a few keys, paused, looked at Marcus, then back at the screen, then back at Marcus. A flicker, barely a second. But Marcus caught it, the subtle tightening of the jaw, the tiny flare of the nostrils. Recognition. Not of the name, but of the image in front of him not fitting the mental checklist of acceptable clientele. "I'm sorry," the clerk said finally, voice honeyed with artificial regret. "I don't seem to have your reservation." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Just slightly. He said nothing. The clerk leaned closer to the monitor, tapping more keys, more for show than necessity. After a few theatrical seconds, he looked up again, smiled tighter now. "Maybe you booked at the Bellwether downtown location," he suggested, tone slipping into something that could almost pass for helpful if you weren't paying attention. Marcus paid attention. "No," he said simply. Silence stretched between them, thin and awkward. A manager hovered nearby now, mid-40s, expensive shoes, hair slicked back with something that probably cost more than Marcus's entire outfit. He watched the exchange with clinical detachment, the way you might watch someone trying to return used merchandise without a receipt. Marcus caught his reflection in the mirror-paneled columns. Old hoodie, old sneakers, no Rolex flashing from his wrist, no monogrammed luggage screaming pedigree, just a black man standing in a palace of curated whiteness, daring to exist. And that, apparently, was offense enough. You know, it's funny. The richer the place, the poorer the assumptions. The manager approached at last, pasting on a smile that had been dry cleaned for situations like this. "Sir, are you sure you have the correct hotel? We don't seem to have any record of your booking." The way he said "sir" was almost an insult. Marcus exhaled slowly, feeling the temperature of the room drop a fraction of a degree, feeling the way the people at the bar were starting to notice just a ripple of interest, but enough. Enough for the manager to shift uncomfortably, enough for the security guard near the elevator to straighten subtly, hand resting just a little too close to the radio clipped to his belt. Not a guest, not a client, a problem. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling to the confirmation email. Reservation number. Booking One Yuging Code 1. Payment already processed under corporate account. He held it out. The manager didn't look. Didn't want to, because seeing it would mean acknowledging him. Acknowledging that the error wasn't Marcus's, it was theirs. Maybe you should call ahead next time, the manager said, voice oiled with passive aggression. Maybe, or maybe he should just fire them all, but not yet, because Marcus Reed wasn't here to check in. He was here to check out everything, and he had already seen enough to know. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was the culture, Suriname. He smiled. A small, dangerous thing, almost imperceptible under the fluorescent glow of a chandelier, worth more than 3 years of Ivy League tuition. Then he turned without a word, leaving the manager blinking behind him, because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's just the prelude, and the prelude to a reckoning is always quietus. The front desk clerk didn't even bother pretending to search properly. His fingers tapped the keyboard with the lazy rhythm of a man half listening to a conference call, barely glancing at the screen. Marcus Reed stood there, silent, his backpack's worn leather brushing against his hoodie with every slow, measured breath, the air heavy with the scent of oud-lace luxury and something colder dismissal. Behind the marble counter, the clerk leaned toward his colleague, a blonde woman whose diamond-hard nails gleamed under the golden downlights, and whispered something he didn't think Marcus could hear. A brittle, sour laugh escaped her lips, slicing through the jazz humming from hidden speakers. They didn't care if Marcus noticed. Maybe they thought he wouldn't understand. Or worse, maybe they thought he wouldn't matter. A man in a navy pinstripe suit rolled his suitcase across the Persian rug nearby. Instantly, the clerk straightened, his spine snapping to attention, voice brightening to a polished gleam. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to the Bellwether Grand. Right this way, please." Marcus watched the transformation, noting how quickly reverence replaced indifference when the right skin tone entered the frame. Another flicker, barely a second, but Marcus caught it, the blonde clerk's eye roll, directed squarely at him before she turned back to her screen. "You know, they say prejudice is subtle. I say it's just lazy, dressed in better shoes." The security guard noticed too, shifting at his post near the elevators, framed in polished brass, his hand casually brushing the radio clip to his belt. He didn't act yet, but he was ready. Marcus lowered his gaze to the glowing confirmation email on his phone, holding it out again. Patient, unshaken, undeniable. The clerk glanced at it as if it were contagious. He didn't reach for it, didn't even lean closer. "Sir, are you sure you're in the right place?" he murmured, the words coated in velvet but reeking of suspicion. Across the lobby, laughter floated from the bar, where champagne glasses clinked under the muted glow of Murano chandeliers. Marcus didn't have to look to know what he'd see: tailored suits, diamond cufflinks, the effortless choreography of those who belonged. He could feel the perimeter being drawn around him, invisible but solid as glass. Not welcome, not credible, not one of us. The manager reappeared, his cologne slicing through the air, tailored suit hugging a body shaped more by boardrooms than by conscience. His eyes scanned Marcus, lingering just long enough on the sneakers, the hoodie, the absence of visible wealth. "Sir," he said, syrupy smooth, "if you don't have a valid booking, we're going to have to ask you to step outside while we assist our other guests." The words dripped politeness, but the meaning was a shove. Get out. Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, somewhere deep, a door cracked open and he stepped through memory into another time, another lobby, another layer of polished exclusion. 19 years old, standing outside a glass tower on Wall Street, rain slicking the sidewalks into mirrors, handing out glossy flyers for a no-name investment firm. Every man in a tailored suit brushing past him without a glance. Every woman clicking by, umbrellas tilting, as if proximity to him might tarnish their wealth. He remembered offering a flyer to a man who recoiled like he might catch poverty through contact. He remembered the slow, burning shame swallowed whole, and he remembered thinking, one cold, rain-soaked night one day, you'll see me. One day, you'll wish you had. The memory folded itself neatly back into the present as Marcus inhaled the expensive, over-filtered air of the Bellwether Grand and tucked his phone away without comment. Aaron, the junior staffer tucked behind the side desk, had been watching, Small, young, her blazer slightly too large on her slender frame, but her eyes bright and wide caught every flicker of what had just passed. She shouldn't have spoken. New hires were trained to stay invisible, to absorb the hotel's polished cruelty without letting it wrinkle their smiles. But Erin's voice, small and clear, cut across the false civility. "Excuse me," she said, glancing nervously at her manager. "Sometimes the system takes a while to sync. Maybe we should double-check the back end." The manager didn't respond with words. He didn't need to. The tight snap of his gaze, the slight shake of his head, the silent, stay silent mandate. It landed heavier than any spoken reprimand. Erin shrank back instantly, pressing her palms flat against the counter, biting her lips so hard the color drained from her face. Marcus caught her gaze for a heartbeat. A flicker of apology passed between them, and he gave her the smallest of nods. Because the funny thing about those who speak up, they're almost never the ones who need to say sorry. The manager turned back toward Marcus with a practiced, polished smile. "If you could wait outside, sir," he said, gesturing with a hand too well manicured to ever grip something as rough as consequence. "We'll notify you if anything changes." The subtext was carved into the air itself. Nothing will. Marcus nodded once, slow and deliberate, then turned. His sneakers whispered against the Persian rug. His breath caught the lingering scent of oud and denial. And as he walked toward the massive revolving doors gleaming in the afternoon sun, he paused not out of hesitation, but because power sometimes lingers in stillness. He didn't look back. He didn't need to, because sometimes the weight of silence is heavier than all the chandeliers in the world. Marcus Reed stepped out into the cool spring air, the marble lobby's hush collapsing behind him like a lie finally exhaled. And as he stood beneath the towering facade he had once dreamed into existence, he smiled. Because the story they thought they were writing about him, he was about to rewrite it in ink they couldn't wash away. Marcus moved with the quiet assurance of a man who had walked these halls long before the current gatekeepers learned how to paste on their smiles. His sneakers glided over floorboards polished so ruthlessly that the Brazilian walnut grains shimmered like liquid bronze under the muted spotlighting. Around him, the air pulsed with a cocktail of scents, the sharp tang of polished brass, the faint sweetness of crushed violet petals embedded in the centerpiece arrangements, and somewhere underneath it all, the clinical chill of a place too sanitized for its own soul. He slipped into a side lounge cloaked in semi-darkness, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a courtyard where water lilies floated on a mirror-black pond, their petals catching slices of late-afternoon sun like lazy hands reaching for warmth. Here, the noise of the lobby glasses clinking, polite laughter leaking from the bar faded into something hollow, like a party already dying behind drawn velvet curtains. From the depths of his battered backpack, Marcus pulled out a tablet. Not sleek, not new, a matte black slab with no visible brand, edges nicked from years of travel. To anyone else, it looked like an afterthought. In reality, it was a relic from the first $1 million security deal he ever negotiated, a machine built for bypassing polished facades and reaching into the marrow of a system. He powered it up with 3 deliberate taps. No Wi-Fi needed. This machine didn't request permission. It took it. As the screen came alive with a muted hum, Marcus leaned back into the leather armchair. The leather wasn't cheap. You could tell by how it exhaled, not squeaked, when he shifted. English bridal leather, deep oxblood red, conditioned so many times it felt like butter under his palms. Around him, the walls weren't blank canvases. They were paneled with Macassar ebony, so dark they seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. A single sconce burned overhead, throwing elongated shadows that curled like smoke across the ceiling's intricate coffer patterns. The Bellwether Grand wasn't just luxury, it was curated arrogance, bottled and sold by the ounce. Marcus smiled faintly, tapping into the back-end system with a series of encrypted keystrokes. Passwords parted like tall grass under a patient hand. Firewalls yielded without protest. Within seconds, the true heartbeat of the hotel flickered across his screen. Reservation logs, staff communication threads, internal guest notes. He scanned without rushing, the way you might read an obituary for someone you never liked. There it was. Guest presented non-standard attire. Potential fraud risk. Guest mismatch VIP aesthetic guidelines not met. Booking reassigned due to profile inconsistencies. The words weren't crude. They didn't need to be. Racism didn't have to shout when it could hum quietly under layers of corporate euphemism. Further down, he found a cluster of cancellations, all logged within minutes of check-in attempts, all flagged with vague codes, system error, room maintenance required, guest satisfaction precaution. He traced the names Williams, Hernandez, Patel, Jackson, faces he could almost see, families he could almost hear explaining, helplessly, that yes, they did have a reservation. Yep, they did belong. And somewhere behind each deletion, behind each polite lie, stood someone in a pressed uniform deciding who deserved comfort and who deserved correction. You know, rot never starts in the walls. It starts in the silence between them. Marcus adjusted his grip on the tablet, the edge cold against the thin calluses on his fingertips. His breathing stayed slow, steady, the way it had that night years ago when he'd signed the first deeds to this place under a name no one bothered to remember. He archived every record, every name, every timestamp, not for revenge, for precision, because when the hammer falls, it's not the volume of the swing that matters. It's the weight of everything built up behind it. The system stuttered for a moment, detecting administrative activity from a source it hadn't seen in months. Somewhere upstairs, a junior IT analyst might have gotten a ping, but Marcus wasn't worried. By the time anyone noticed, the only thing left to audit would be themselves. He closed the system gently, the screen dimming to black. Outside the glass walls, the lily pond trembled under the weight of a stray gust, scattering ripples across its perfect surface. Inside, Marcus stood up, rolling his shoulders beneath the faded hoodie, feeling the stitched weight of memory settle over him like armor. The elevator bank at the far end of the hall glowed softly, its brushed nickel doors waiting like the mouth of a loaded cannon. And upstairs, in a sun-drenched boardroom lined with imported teak and self-congratulation, the Bellwether's leadership team laughed over hors d'oeuvres, blissfully ignorant that the storm had already entered the building. Marcus Reed headed for the elevators without looking back. Sometimes, the loudest warnings don't come with sirens. They come dressed in silence and sneakers. The hallway stretched before him like the mouth of a waiting beast, tiled in sheets of white onyx that caught the ambient lighting and fractured it into pools of molten gold. The floors, cool and faintly translucent, murmured underfoot. Each step Marcus took dissolving into the kind of silence that wasn't absence but judgment. Along the walls, pillars clad in black ebony rose like sentinels, their varnished surfaces gleaming with the sullen patience of things that had seen too much and said too little. The air carried a thin thread of ylang-ylang and aged oak, a perfume too meticulously balanced to be anything but deliberate, and yet it couldn't mask the sharper undercurrent, the sterile chill of old systems fortified by newer lies. Marcus moved without haste, the weight of his hoodie brushing rhythmically against his frame, his sneakers barely whispering against the stone. Behind him, the hum of the lobby receded not abruptly, but like a fading song you weren't invited to sing along to. The laughter, the clink of cutlery, the rustle of pressed linen napkins, all of it blurred into the edges of his awareness, leaving only the cold precision of his purpose. Somewhere above the ambient noise, he could hear the soft click of heels and Oxfords crossing other corridors, each one careful not to intersect his path. The closer he drew to the elevators, the heavier the world seemed to become, not visibly. No alarm bells, no staff surging forward to bar his progress. Just a tightening of the air, a subtle rearrangement of human instincts. A bellman paused mid-step near the concierge desk, his gloved hands clutching a Louis Vuitton steamer trunk a beat longer than necessary. A security guard, half hidden in a velvet alcove, touched his radio earpiece, lips pressed into a line too neutral to trust. A guest sipping cognac at the corner bar turned slightly in his chair, his gaze skimming Marcus like a scanner looking for a reason. The VIP elevator stood waiting at the end of the hall, its brushed nickel doors catching the low light and turning it soft and fluid like the surface of a well-fed river. Above the call button, a narrow strip of amber light glowed steadily, a heartbeat too slow, too calculated. Marcus reached out, fingertips brushing against the glass panel, feeling the minute vibration as the sensor accepted his presence without question, its programming still blind to the things its operators had learned to see too well. There was a moment, the faintest hitch in time, where the air seemed to tense, as if the building itself exhaled in protest. Somewhere deeper in the architecture, a ventilation duct groaned, the sound masked to most by the low, ever-present thrum of a multi-million-dollar HVAC system, but not to Marcus. He caught at the slight rattle of metal against stone, the almost imperceptible shudder of marble veined too thin to carry its own arrogance anymore. The elevator chimed, a soft, golden note designed to soothe and impress, but in the cavernous hush of the corridor, it sounded more like a warning bell tolling for those who didn't know they should already be afraid. Marcus stepped forward. The polished steel doors slid apart with a grace too perfect to be casual, revealing a space lined with champagne-toned mirrors and a hand-woven alpaca floor mat so dense it muted even defiance. He caught a glimpse of himself in the mirrored walls, a silhouette draped in gray cotton, sneakers dusted with the memories of unpaved roads, posture straight and steady as a judge about to deliver a sentence no one could appeal. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement, two clerks peeking subtly from behind a column, their whispers tucked inside their hands. No one stopped him. No one dared a weed or none. None of any or none. Sure. Funny how the doors designed to keep you out sometimes end up trapping the wrong people inside. Marcus Reed stepped into the elevator without breaking stride. As the doors whispered shut behind him, slicing the tension in the lobby like a guillotine, he didn't flinch. He didn't rush. He simply pressed the button for the top floor of the executive suite where the council of the self-congratulating, the gatekeepers of filtered smiles and unspoken judgments, sat basking under their own manufactured stars. The elevator began its ascent, each floor flashing past like the tick of a clock counting down to an overdue reckoning. And Marcus, he stood in the rising silence, letting it fold around him like an old friend he no longer needed to fear. The elevator sighed open onto a private vestibule. The floor is a cascade of hand-laid emerald mosaic tiles that caught the soft, recessed lighting and threw back slivers of color like the bottom of a wishing well. Marcus stepped out, his soul sinking slightly into the thick Icelandic sheep's wool runner that muffled even intentions, let alone footsteps. The walls here weren't just walls, they were statements, clad in warm walnut with veins of gold shimmering under layers of artisan lacquer, as if even the architecture was trying to bribe him to forget what it was hiding. Ahead, a pair of double doors loomed, carved from solid black walnut. The handles brushed bronze shaped into the twin crests of old money arrogance. Behind them, the sounds filtered through low laughter, the gentle clink of crystal, the muted rustle of silk against leather, the heartbeat of a council that had no idea they were already bleeding. Marcus reached for the handle. It was cool, almost clammy against his palm, as if the door itself understood what was about to happen. He pressed it open without hesitation, stepping into a room drenched in wealth so dense it almost suffocated. The boardroom was a cathedral of self-importance, a soaring ceiling dressed in gunmetal beams, modernist chandeliers drooping like frozen comets. The centerpiece was a sapple veneer table, long enough to seat 20, polished to a glass-like sheen that reflected every lie ever spoken across it. Chairs of ox-blood Italian leather encircled the perimeter, each occupied by a figure dressed in precision-tailored armor, dark suits, pearl cufflinks, haircuts that cost more than the average mortgage payment. Marcus walked into their midst like a dropped coin in a church, and for a moment, no one moved. No one reacted. He could have been invisible, or worse, dismissed entirely as a misplaced courier or an overeager staffer too stupid to know his place. Some turned their heads briefly, furrowing their brows before returning to their murmured conversations. Others didn't even bother looking up, their attention firmly locked on wine lists and financial forecasts spread across the table like modern-day scrolls of power. But not all of them missed him. From the far end of the table, a man in his early 60s, his hair a regimented silver, his frame lean and whipcord tight despite the years, froze mid-sentence. Mr. Ibersurnam Halvorsen, senior partner. Russekenemorn, Surdinarneworn. Old guard, old blood, Surdier Warnemworns. His eyes, once slicing through merger deals and hostile takeovers without blinking, now locked onto Marcus with a kind of stunned recognition that no amount of training could suppress. The air folded in on itself, compressing the space between bodies until it felt like the room might collapse inward from the sudden gravitational pull of revelation. Halvorsen pushed back his chair, the noise a raw scrape against the immaculate floor. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, the words clawing up his throat like something half-drowned. Marcus. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. In that single syllable, the entire room shifted. Heads snapped toward Marcus now, the silence turning from disinterest to alarm, from dismissal to a creeping, dawning horror. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't move fast. He simply stepped forward, the old sneakers scuffing gently against the priceless rug, the hoodie hanging loose over a frame that somehow, impossibly, filled the entire room now. He reached up, slow, deliberate, and pulled back the hood, letting it fall against his shoulders with a sound too soft to measure, but too heavy to ignore. And there he stood. Not a delivery boy, not a mistake, not someone who had lost their way into the corridors of power, but the very architect of the floors they were standing on. For a moment longer, no one spoke. The only sound was the low, embarrassed buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead, struggling to stay unnoticed. You know, they never teach you this in business school. The sharpest power isn't announced with a title. It arrives in silence. And by the time you realize it's there, it's already sitting in your chair. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. The room, once so filled with its own importance, now vibrated with the brittle crackle of fear dressed up as civility. And somewhere deep inside every tailored jacket, behind every professional smile, a single, chilling thought took root. They had made a mistake too big to fix, a mistake already staring back at them, wearing worn sneakers and the calm, unsmiling face of the man they thought they could erase with indifference. Marcus Reed stood still, and for the first time in a long time, the Bellwether Grand's boardroom was exactly what it should have been, silent, waiting, afraid. Marcus didn't rush. He let the silence thicken, wrapping itself around the council like a second skin itching, tightening, suffocating as he stood at the head of the table, hands tucked casually into the front pocket of his hoodie, posture loose but somehow heavier than the weight of all the polished marble and imported art surrounding them. His gaze swept the room slowly, peeling back the layers of tailored suits and polished smiles to reveal what lay festering beneath. Then he spoke low, even, just enough volume to slice through the air without disturbing its heavy, choking stillness. "Room 506, he said, voice smooth as a scalpel's edge, canceled because the guest didn't fit the VIP aesthetic. He didn't look down at any notes. He didn't need to. Your decision, wasn't it, Mr. Landon?" His head tilted slightly toward a middle-aged man in a navy suit, whose fingers fumbled clumsily with the Mont Blanc pen laid neatly in front of him. Landon's face drained of color as he shifted in his seat, the leather creaking under his sudden, involuntary movement, eyes darting toward the conference room's heavy doors as if gauging the possibility of escape. Marcus let the tension marinate for a second longer before his attention moved dispassionate, surgical to another corner of the table. Suite 1103. Denied amenities access for dress code concerns. A Mrs. Beringer's call, if I'm not mistaken. The woman in the soft gray pantsuit lowered her gaze to the polished tabletop, her posture folding in on itself, hands clenching in her lap as her cheeks colored visibly under the recessed lights overhead. She didn't deny it. None of them did. He continued, methodical, unhurried, each accusation slipping into the room like a whispered confession that somehow carried the weight of an executioner's axe. Reservation flagged for high risk despite full prepayment. Late-night room downgrades masked as maintenance issues. Repeated system glitches mysteriously favoring certain profiles over others. Each line etched deeper into the expensive air, dragging the truths they had buried beneath bureaucratic jargon out into the light where they squirmed naked and irredeemable. Across the table, small betrayals gave them away, beads of sweat collecting at hairlines, fingers drumming unconsciously against mahogany, the tight clenching of jawlines that moments before had been softened by the illusion of control. Some tried to scribble notes, feigning distraction. Others shifted in their seats, the thick, buttery leather groaning under the weight of their discomfort. Someone cleared their throat, a brittle sound that snapped and was quickly swallowed. Marcus said nothing more for a while, allowing the thick silence to steep until the room became a cocoon of shame. Funny thing about fear, it never arrives with a shout. It seeps in on quiet feet, settling into the spaces between heartbeats. He let them sit with it, let the invisible walls close in tighter, before speaking again, his tone almost conversational but cutting like a scalpel, tracing old scars. You didn't lose your way because you didn't know better. You lost your way because you thought no one was watching. No one moved. No rebuttal was offered. No defenses stammered forth to plead ignorance. They couldn't. Their crimes weren't written in neon. They were whispered behind closed doors, etched into policies, wrapped in smiles, sealed with handshakes over glasses of imported scotch. They knew it, and now, finally, so did he. Marcus stood there a moment longer, the buzz of the ventilation system slicing thinly through the weighted silence, the room breathing shallowly under the crushing gravity of unveiled truth. He didn't gloat. He didn't lecture. When he turned to leave, it was not with the fury of a man wronged, but with the quiet inevitability of someone who had simply come to collect what was already his. And as the doors whispered shut behind him, leaving the council in their crumbling sanctuary of half-truths and polished regrets, one thing was clear when the truth walks into the room. It doesn't shout. It simply stands there and watches you crumble. The heavy walnut doors sighed shut behind Marcus, their soft, reluctant thuds swallowed by the carpeted corridor stretching ahead in muted opulence. The Icelandic wool beneath his sneakers absorbed the sound of his steps, rendering him a ghost drifting through a monument built for people who had mistaken velvet for virtue. Cold air from the central ducts brushed his skin, sharp and dry, carrying the sterile scent of too much filtered perfection. Inside the boardroom, movement stirred chairs creaking, papers rustling, throats clearing in nervous unison. For a heartbeat, it was chaos dressed in the silk of restraint, a room full of power players suddenly shrinking back into the size of their mistakes. Marcus kept walking, unhurried. His presence stretched across the hallway like a ripple in glass. Behind him, they scrambled. The click of polished Oxfords and the sharper tap of high-end heels echoed after him, growing desperate. Victor broke first, a man whose hair was always a fraction too perfect, whose smile had always curved a little too fast. "Mister." Reed, Victor called out, breathless, his voice pitching higher than he intended. "I just listen. We've always respected your vision. Always. Some misunderstandings happen in big systems. You know." Marcus didn't answer. His pace didn't change. His eyes remained fixed on the gilded elevator doors ahead, the brushed bronze catching the low light in oily sheens. Savannah wasn't far behind, her designer heels clicking frantically against the floor as she caught up, a polished apology already coiled on her tongue. "Marcus, please, you know it wasn't personal. You're too important to this. To us." Her voice dipped into something soft, something syrupy, the kind of sweetness that leaves your teeth aching after the lie settles. He turned slightly, just enough for their faces to register in his periphery the way their shoulders hunched in deference, their smiles strained into unnatural shapes. The gold nameplates on the wall gleamed behind them, silent witnesses to the speed with which loyalty twisted when status changed. Marcus didn't stop. He didn't need to. His silence demanded more than their babbling ever could. "You know," Victor chuckled nervously, "we could rebuild this place better than ever with you leading it." "Of course. Clean house. Set new policies. Show people what Bellwether really stands for." Savannah chimed in quickly, her voice too bright, too rehearsed. "It's not about blame, Marcus. It's about moving forward. Together." For a moment, Marcus let them believe he was listening. He slowed just slightly, enough to feel the shift, the eagerness crackling off them like static. Then he spoke, his voice low and even, the kind of tone that didn't invite conversation but demanded consequences. "There's a leak in your system," he said, not bothering to specify which of their many sins he meant. "Find it. Fix it. Now one horn in us." The words hit harder than a shout. They scrambled to agree, nodding too fast, smiling too wide. Marcus gave them nothing more. He stepped into the elevator, the gold doors yawning open like a set of scales about to tip. Before they closed, he caught one last glimpse, Victor and Savannah pivoting instantly toward each other, already calculating, already whispering. They didn't even make it subtle. Savannah's hand brushed Victor's arm, casual as a venomous snake slipping between rocks. Victor smiled tight, eager, and murmured something Marcus didn't need to hear. He could guess. Promises. Alliances. Betrayals redrawn with the speed of rats deserting a sinking ship. Funny how loyalty always ran on a clock. Inside the elevator, The polished mirror caught Marcus's reflection. Not the scuffed sneakers, not the faded hoodie, but the set of his jaw, the steadiness of his stare. Some storms don't announce themselves with thunder. Some just open the door and let you drown. And as the elevator doors slid shut with a whisper, sealing him off from the crumbling empire behind him, Marcus Reed let the silence have the last word. The elevator slid to a halt with a breath-soft sigh, its satin bronze doors parting without a sound, revealing the main lobby bathed in a muted glow. Marcus stepped out, the onyx floor cool and breathing faintly underfoot, the scent of cedarwood and white jasmine wrapping around him like a whisper. The walls of the elevator, lined with dark walnut and stitched Italian leather panels, closed silently behind him, sealing away the weight of the floor above. The lobby buzzed, but quietly now as if the building itself had sensed the shift. Staff moved with the smooth choreography of high-end service, but glances flickered nervously. Whispers slithered at the edges of conversation. At the far end, near the concierge desk carved from a single slab of olive ash, Erin stood, half hidden behind the marble counter, fingers fiddling nervously with the hem of her blazer. She had seen him. Of course she had. Marcus caught her eye. No smile, no command, just a single, slow nod. Erin hesitated, heart hammering visibly against the fabric of her uniform, then rounded the counter and approached, her steps muffled against the thick lamb's wool carpeting, her hands twisted together at her waist, shoulders hunched slightly, the tremor in her movements betraying a dozen silent fears. When she reached him, she stood straighter than she felt, lifting her chin even though her throat tightened. Marcus regarded her, the corners of his mouth unmoving, his expression carved in patience and something far deeper, something earned. "How long?" he asked, voice low but clear. "Have you been watching?" Erin swallowed once, hard. Her voice, when it came, wavered just enough to be human. "Since my second day," she said. I noticed things, small things. I didn't know what to do." She didn't plead. She didn't defend. She just told the truth, naked and trembling in the space between them. Marcus studied her for a beat longer. Around them, the lobby's golden light pooled lazily against high-polished floors, dappling the edges of her worn but perfectly pressed uniform. Other staff paused mid-task, stealing glances. They could feel the gravity bending around her, around him, around this moment where something invisible was shifting. Without ceremony, without speeches or grand gestures, Marcus simply said, "You'll be running the lobby starting today." Erin's breath caught audibly. Her eyes widened, mouth parting slightly in shock. She opened it to speak, then thought better, pressing her lips into a thin line of gratitude too big for words. Behind her, a ripple passed through the room like the silent bowing of trees before an unseen wind. Staff stiffened, posture straightened, conversations faltered and faded. Again a word in. They understood without needing a memo. Without needing a meeting, change didn't arrive with fanfare here. It walked in wearing old sneakers and left carrying the weight of new beginnings. Marcus didn't wait for applause. He didn't wait for thanks. He simply turned toward the exit, each step measured and quiet, the lobby's heavy doors parting before him as if the building itself had finally remembered who built it. As he stepped into the crisp twilight beyond, the last of the golden light catching on the satin-smooth curve of the hotel's insignia, a thought brushed gently against the back of his mind. Sometimes, the loudest victories are the ones that leave no echo. Thank you for walking this silent storm with us. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps uncover the truths still hidden behind polished doors.